Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to this very exciting panel, all talking about big ideas and big money. That money gets people to pay attention, doesn't it?
Yeah. I can see they've all perked up.
So what I'm going to do is we're just going to start with a little poll. We're going to talk a lot about innovation in this panel today. And I'd like you guys to use your wonderful little signs here and answer the following question. Who's happy with the pace of innovation in the hospitality tech space over the last decade? Oh, okay. I see lots of little red, unhappy faces. For some reason, over this quarter, we've got lots of blue ones. For some reason, they're the outliers.
Yeah.
So
they're the representatives of our companies.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to ask my panel here. What do you think of that? How would you characterize what's happened in terms of innovation in hospitality tech over the last decade? And do you think it's easier for companies to make a difference in the market today? Let's start with Richard.
Well, I guess we've been around for 13 years, and I think we've been growing really, really fast in the last maybe 8. So from that perspective, I think it's been great, and I think we've done some great things, like the open API that I think we introduced for PMSs that is now the standard. But I think in general, it's quite difficult to innovate a lot of stuff in hospitality, because I feel like a lot of the innovations really came actually maybe kind of 30 or 40 years ago, and then they became broad-based. And I think the next cycle of innovation will probably come now.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. Marcus, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's been an exciting 10 years. Hostaway is celebrating its 10 years anniversary now, and I think it was in 2016 when we put the all-in-one vacation rental software on our website, which was pretty strange at the time because everyone was using a tech stack. They had sometimes even 25 different technologies, and nowadays you just use one platform for everything. I don't know if that's innovation, but to me personally, I think no, there hasn't been enough innovation. But fortunately for us, AI has come to save the day. We've seen massive changes in the last year or so in how businesses are run and operated, and how to make money. And I'm really excited about the future.
Cool. And Sean?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say a lot of incumbent technology companies profit from the dysfunction in travel, and so there's definitely a lot of barriers to entry, but if you look at, I think, the 3 companies you have here today, we're also just over 10 years old. We've gone from 0 to 80,000 hotels. It can be done, but there's a lot of structural hurdles to overcome, and so it requires real determination, really good founders, good management teams, but I think we're proof that there's a demand, from within the customers, the hospitality businesses themselves, for technology and for innovation. And so I feel it's a really important part of the ecosystem as much as the investors behind it.
So Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen, he talked about the innovator's dilemma, where you have these incumbent companies who control the marketplace. Could I ask each one of you, which of the companies that's out there in the hospitality tech space right now do you identify most closely with, and what makes you different, better than those companies? And I'm going to start with Marcus because I see Richard's starting to get ready here. So Marcus.
I think in business, if you do what others are doing and you just do it better, you got it all wrong. You need to do the exact opposite of what everyone's doing, and that's quite easy. You just do research and see what is everyone doing. I found out very early on that there's nobody really in the hospitality space wearing heavy metal t-shirts all the time, so that's what I'm doing. It's worked so far. We're market leader in the US, we're market leader globally when it comes to vacation rental software, and I think that's what we're going to keep doing.
Sean?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say every innovator is standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So you're always disrupting the disruptor. We would look at companies like Amadeus, and obviously maybe a bit controversial being in their homeland, as an incumbent, right? A lot of respect in terms of their size and scale, but they were born at a time when technology was different, and so they have some real underlying sort of challenges in terms of their platform and technology, and their ability to now embrace newer technologies like AI. And so that's where companies like Lighthouse can really make a difference, right? So we're getting to a scale, we're built on a modern architecture, and so we're very uniquely primed to take advantage of AI, because AI in itself is not the solution. You still need to have the data and content to drive it. And that's where I think incumbents may be a little bit challenged, and why AI might, in many ways, help accelerate innovation.
And Richard?
So I think relatively, like I always actually really identify with the very, very early days of Oracle. I think like when you hear the stories basically of like Larry Ellison and the kind of the 80s and the 90s basically, or the 90s mainly, I think that's actually all the early 2000s and like competing with the Siebel systems and things like that. Like I think those are actually great. I think that Micros, in terms of what then became Oracle Hospitality, was just an incredible company. I think the way that they thought about the hotelier was, I think that kind of customer centricity really, really flowed through that company. But I also then think about it like us, like who's actually coming to kill us? Who's going to actually, be thinking about it from, I think we were born in the cloud, and so how would I try and kill us if we were born in an age of AI? And I think that there's a lot of rethinking that even us sitting up here have to actually do in these days.
So the three of you have all mentioned AI, and that it's going to make it easier for companies who are nipping at your heels to actually disrupt you guys. So what are you guys doing to prevent that? How are you staying ahead of the game? Who wants to jump in? Go for it.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to preserve your position, you're already losing, right? And so I think what makes us particularly excited about AI is if you think about that traveler journey from discovery and research to booking to payment to staying, right? Like, so there's that sort of whole process. And there are so many different companies, some of them very large, that are profiting from the dysfunction in that journey, right? Where, it's not often that we have a moment where we can take a step back and think about that traveler experience and truly think about how you can revolutionize that process of enabling a traveler to have an experience that's very personal to them. And so for us, we see AI as a remarkable moment, right? Where essentially that whole interface is changing. It gives us the ability to really personalize particularly that research phase. And then the challenge becomes bookability, payments, and then obviously integrating with the PMS to have a wonderful stay experience. And so, again, you need to have disruptors and innovators that are willing to tackle that sort of challenge at scale and overcome a lot of these structural barriers. But I think you're starting to see a generation of companies now, some of whom are represented on the stage, that really have the appetite to do that. And so, again, appetite is one thing, funding is another. And so you're starting to see, I think, a real belief from the investor community that actually this is a unique moment for travel, that there is an opportunity to really disrupt.
Can I be a bit controversial here and say, yes, I agree that the tech companies are really starting to embrace AI, but is the hospitality industry, the operators, are they ready for this revolution that's coming?
Definitely not ready, but I think Phocuswright had a piece of research where like north of 50% of travelers are now planning through some sort of agentic interface, right? And so that's a really telling sort of statistic in terms of the early stage of this technology adoption. And that sort of change is going to drive adoption through the whole ecosystem. There's no question.
Yeah, for vacation rentals, the challenge is always that you got properties in different locations. Unlike a hotel where you can have people in the same building that can do things, everything has to be online. And that makes it very labor intensive. So our customers are incredibly happy to adopt any kind of AI whatsoever that comes out. But to answer your question, we are trying our best to stay humble. We got a competitor that's smaller than us. They have 950 employees. We're bigger. We have 250 employees. And everything we do, we always focus on the customer first to make sure how can we do this with as little effort and as few resources as possible, because that's what those smaller competitors are doing. They have a lack of resources, so they have to innovate in order to survive. If we give ourselves too much resources, we're going to stop innovating, and then we'll be dead.
Yeah, like I think that's what I always kind of think about. It's like You know, if you were starting a company today, you probably wouldn't get a customer support team. You'd just work with like 11 Labs, Decagon, Ada, like whoever it might be, to actually try and think about how you do that, try and think about how you train up those models basically so that you'd never actually get into that game. Same thing with, you know, outbound, same, like with all of these different tools, I always think, you know, and we try within Mews to actually have, we've started this thing called Edge Days basically, where we just actually try and have some time for education of every single person basically in the company that's now actually doing AI, building bots basically to automate some part of their daily life within Mews. And I think that that's something that we're trying to kind of promote as a cultural thing. And then from my side, I'm just thinking about like, how could you build Mews with 3 people? You know, and I think that hoteliers have to be thinking the same way. Like, how should I think about running my hotel with just 3 people? You know, and I think that should be the kind of the dominant mindset of every single hotelier today.
But do you think that hoteliers are capable of making that that mind shift?
100%.
Because
like I feel like we're now like this industry gets like crapped on all the time for like being, you know, Luddites. I just think like the actual job is serving guests and serving customers, and I think sometimes like us hotel tech companies goes like no, you have to be tech companies. Yeah, and I think that, no, like, it's our job to make it much easier for them to actually do the job that they love. And I think that, you know, AI, or especially like LLMs, or, you know, any kind of generative platforms that have come out, like, I think that those actually make that job much, much easier and more human than it's ever been before, because you're not having to stare at a screen. You're actually able to kind of now interact with guests in a much, much better way.
And I think that's the key. Like, hospitality is a people business, and you don't want to take the people out of the business. You want to make them more effective at delivering a great experience, delighting your customers, your guests, etc. And I think that's, again, how this technology wave will help with that.
And the customers don't have to adopt AI. I'll give a very practical example. We recently ran through hundreds of thousands of properties. We analyzed the description of the property and the actual amenities that they had selected for that property. And we found tens of thousands of properties that just forgot to advertise. For example, their title is waterfront, but they didn't click the checkbox of waterfront. So we automatically did that, and we saw an increase in bookings for those properties where we change those things. And that's where AI benefits the hotelier, the property manager, without them having to choose.
Yeah, I think that, for me, is actually the biggest danger that hoteliers can get into, is that they, rather than playing with the actual technology themselves and trying to kind of think about how would an AI actually think about my property, they start thinking in the same kind of 2019 way of kind of thinking about it. It's like, oh, how can I buy some kind of marketing solution that's going to help me actually kind of do this? Whereas what you should be doing is, for example, like, how do I describe my property in the best possible way? How do I build a knowledge base, basically, that some sort of AI is going to find? You know, how do I make sure that every single room in my 60-bedroom property is really, really accurately described, so that, you know, you can actually, for example, like at the end of the day, say how much sunlight this room actually gets versus another one.
So let's change tack for a few minutes here. If I'm not mistaken, all of you have raised funding comparatively recently. What does the investment landscape look like for companies trying to enter the hospitality tech space right now? And what arguments were you able to make to convince investors to sign those big checks? Who wants to go first here, guys?
I can start. It's currently, at least for vacation rental software, it's a massively growing market, and vacation rentals is every year gaining the percentage of accommodation worldwide. So it's definitely an attractive space, but it is getting to a point where it's so mature that it's highly unlikely another big platform is going to emerge, and investors know that. So any exit opportunities for an investor would have to be in an add-on space, and it's very hard to predict because of the all-in-one solution that I mentioned earlier. We can build things ourselves, or we can acquire it. But if we're faster at building than anyone else in the industry, then we're never going to acquire anyone. And that makes it very hard for early stage startups to raise funding at the moment. But the upside is, if you happen to be the market leader and your metrics are great, it's super easy to get funding.
Sean?
Yeah, I think generally investors are attracted to travel. It's a massive industry. 2020 was a really tough year, and I think it completely wiped out a lot of confidence in hospitality generally, and as a consequence, hospitality tech. A big shout out to Phocuswright yesterday. Great to see the startup sort of Shark Tank pitches. Wonderful to see entrepreneurs that are investing their time, which is really what it takes to build a business, is entrepreneurs. And then to see the investors coming in behind that, because to your point, right, so there's kind of a treadmill is probably the best way to describe it, of funding, right? That once you step on that treadmill and you take on your seed capital and then onto VC and then growth equity, private equity, at every stage you're validating the business model, right? You have to prove you have a durable business that has real growth opportunity, that you can address this wonderful market. And then you get to a point where you have companies like ours that are big enough to actually contemplate acquiring smaller companies. Yeah. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for us, which then feeds that sort of early stage ecosystem so that there are exit opportunities. So I actually think it's a wonderful time to be in travel. I think the investors, some of whom are in the room, right, who are actually deep in travel, they know the space, they know the opportunity. And actually, for the first time, I'm starting to see that sort of pool of investors widen. So really encouraging, and I would say to every entrepreneur, every startup person who's looking at travel, of course you have to have a good idea, even better if you can generate a bit of revenue. But I think Richard was making the point earlier, it's a great time to start a business, right? That barrier to entry is so much lower. You don't need an army of engineers anymore. So I think it's an exciting time, and we're going to hopefully see a lot more startups in our space.
Yeah, and I think to that point, we were just chatting backstage, like one thing that's amazing to see is everyone's basically making revenue straight away, which is, I think, something that was kind of there maybe like 2008 to 2012. I think that there's a lot of great opportunities for solopreneurs, whatever that word is, or like very, very small teams to be able to actually build the thing that they want to build the way that they want it, and they don't need to be from a technical background. I think it does really, really help to be an engineer. I think that you do kind of 10x yourself with a lot of even kind of vibe coding things, but if you're using Cursor, if you're using Claude, like I think that those are the great tools right now that really help you accelerate. So I think that from that perspective, it's a really, really great time to build some kind of solution. And as Sean says, like I think it's great also to have companies like us that are acquisitive, that do want to actually kind of really, really accelerate even more.
So what are the advantages of growing by acquisition rather than, as Marcus was saying, having to develop everything for himself?
Like I think that every single company should think about its capital allocation, and I think that if you think that your growth to scale ratio is going to come from your own resources, that's perfect. That like you should totally always do that. If you find that you can grow faster and more efficiently through acquisitions, if you feel that actually the thing that you would be building basically might take you a little bit more time, or at least basically to kind of really get that deep knowledge of that one specific thing, it would actually take you too much time to build it. And if that unlocks some other part basically of the platform that you've wanted to actually kind of build, I think those are all scale moments, and I think that's where that almost that ecosystem of funding becomes really interesting, because we get the funding, and the three companies here basically get the funding because we are growing super fast. We're also really, really exciting from what platforms we can build. And so from that perspective, any single thing that brings scale, whether it's more funding, whether it's another company, or even kind of more team members that are more talented than the ones that had been building before, all of those things are kind of scale agents.
I think it's also having the humility to know that there are just people who can do it better, right? So we just acquired a Barcelona native technology company called the Hotels Network. because they are fantastic at doing what they do. And in fact, they're going to release a product over the next couple of weeks we wouldn't have been able to deliver to the industry, candidly. But now, by bringing these teams together, they get the scale of Lighthouse, and we can bring that to more hotels. So I think there's a lot of benefits to recognizing that you can actually accelerate innovation through acquisition.
As you take on investor money, you often get fairly ambitious growth targets. How do you maintain your original vision? How do you get investors to buy into your vision?
I think with us, it kind of works that way. Like, we've always been very ambitious. We always wanted to kind of go out and conquer the world. And so
I remember a conversation we had about 13 years ago, and I thought you were crazy.
Yeah, but then people realize we're not, or maybe we are. But I think that that's the point, that you actually get the investors to believe in that vision. Hopefully you make them, a lot of money, then they're happy, basically. They can take that to fund more companies, fund more innovation. So I think all of these things really, really work together in an ecosystem, and I think that we should be really happy for that. And I think from my own perspective, I think it's really good to kind of embrace growth in this industry, whichever form it takes.
Marcus?
Well, I spent 8 years trying to convince investors to buy into my vision, and they weren't buying it. And so I took about 5 months off work and started studying really how investments work and how this whole ecosystem works. And I found out that if you just build a great business, they'll come. And then you'll get the luxury of choosing. And we made an internal decision that any investor that has any ideas or suggestions for our business, they can pitch that, but they're going to be eliminated immediately. And we get to do our own thing. If there's investors who want to jump on board, that's okay. They can come and ask and beg, and we might let them in, but only if we get to do what we do best. And that's what we've been doing.
Sean?
We have a slightly more sympathetic view to investors.
I'm thinking Marcus is in a very strong position there.
Yeah, look, I think he has a very good point. You need to have a strong business, and certainly, depending on the stage of business that you're at, strength is determined by the quality of the idea or the quality of your revenue. Fundamentally, investors are a necessary part of innovating and disrupting a sort of an industry at the scale of travel. We believe that they're part of the team, so when we go and actually try and recruit an investor, we don't just see a walking checkbook, we actually look at the quality of the investor, their track record in this particular vertical, and also we do reference checks on companies they've worked with before. But done well, you can have an investor group that are perfectly aligned with your management team, which represents your company strategy, and then there isn't this tension, right? Actually, it's remarkably smooth. And so, we believe that investment is a big part of helping this whole industry grow, develop, and transform. And like I said, I'm really happy to see investors now more active in circling some of the earlier stage companies and also backing companies like ours, because without them, the pace of innovation would be much slower.
Yeah. Just to call out Chris Hemmeter from Thayer, but there are, for example, companies or investors that are focused on travel, and we would have never been the scale that we are at without people like Chris. So I think that for me, I take a really, really positive view of investors, and I think that they're incredibly good for this industry.
I think our last question will be this one. So technology is obviously going to continue to evolve. What major shifts do you see in the tech space for hospitality over the next 5 years? And how are you preparing to lead that change rather than react to it? Let's start with Sean.
Yeah, look, I think for us, it's back to that point about, how does AI truly help and transform over the next 5 years? If you put the guest and the traveler at the center of that, then it's kind of working back from there. And so obviously the discovery phase, and you TripAdvisor and Valtr were talking about this earlier, is an important part of that. But very quickly it's going to be coming about, how do I then personalize that? How do I then book that? How do I pay for it? And then how does that, sort of evolve into the guest journey? So putting that together is a challenge for the industry, but companies like Mews and Hostaway, where you have a platform with open APIs that facilitates innovation, I actually think it's going to accelerate things faster than we've seen before. And from a Lighthouse perspective, it's all about the data. If you don't have good data, good content, then AI is truly garbage in, garbage out. So we believe we have a very big role to play in helping hotels get their data ready, and that we're increasingly going to provide some of the infrastructure for them to be AI ready, and then take full advantage of this amazing wave. Because like I said, I truly believe this is not only once in a generation. I have personally not seen a potentially disruptive technology like this in my lifetime. And so I think hoteliers have a really unique moment to take full advantage of that. And I believe it's not unbelievable to think the next 5 years is when a lot of this is going to happen.
Marcus, one sentence?
AI will mostly benefit the bigger companies rather than the small ones because you need not only the data, but what you need is a business model that allows you to make multiple incremental improvements. And that's where previously you used to do 1% here, 1% there, and suddenly that makes millions. But if you can do it with AI and you get a 20% improvement, 20% improvement, 20% improvement, that's exactly what we're going to see. And this will really accelerate the growth of the companies where you can see those improvements. But if you have 0 customers and you increase that by 20%, you're still at 0.
And last but not least, Richard, one sentence?
I think that I'm going to switch it back to the hoteliers. I think for them, this is a massive growth opportunity. And I think that any hotelier that is not thinking about how AI, how can I automate all of the boring bits of running a hotel? How can I automate my BMS, my PMS, any of these kind of things, have it running on autopilot so I can actually do more. I can service all of my guests more. I can add in way more different services. I think that's going to be the most exciting part of hospitality for the next 5 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking my panel.
Sure.